He's a guitar god, a true pioneer of hard rock, the architect of music's most legendary riffs, and the brooding man in black who gave heavy metal its dark soul. Ritchie Blackmore is, without a doubt, a genius. His playing is a storm of classical precision and raw, bluesy fury. He could conjure melodies that were hauntingly beautiful and brutally heavy, sometimes in the very same song. The intros to Smoke on the Water, Highway Star, and Stargazer aren't just riffs. They're scripture in the book of rock and roll. His influence is immeasurable, a shadow looming over basically every hard rock guitarist who came after him. But that kind of genius often comes with a dark side. In Blackmore's case, it was a volatile, controlling, and notoriously difficult personality that left a trail of shattered bands and broken friendships. For every moment of musical brilliance, there was a story of backstage tyranny. For every fan who worshipped him, there was a fellow rock legend who couldn't stand him. His personality has been described time and again as moody, arrogant, and dismissive. He seemed to thrive on conflict, using his power like a weapon and taking a wicked sort of pleasure in the chaos he created. He was both maestro and tyrant, brilliant creator and petulant destroyer. So, who were the legends brave enough, or maybe just unlucky enough, to stand in the eye of the Ritchie Blackmore hurricane? What happens when massive creative talents and even bigger egos collide? Today, we're counting down the 6 biggest names in rock who clashed with the Man in Black, leading to legendary feuds, bitter rivalries, and some of the most dramatic stories in music history. Coming in at number 6 is the man who was, in many ways, Blackmore's creative other half in Deep Purple, the incomparable John Lord. As the master of the Hammond organ, Lord wasn't just the keyboardist. He was the band's classical conscience. His swirling, thunderous organ was just as crucial to the Deep Purple sound as Blackmore's Stratocaster. Together, they were a dueling force of nature, a perfect storm of guitar and keys that defined the band. In the early days, their musical partnership was the engine that drove the band. They were the 2 pillars holding up the entire Deep Purple sound. But even in a partnership that created such iconic music, the seeds of conflict were always there, and they all grew from one thing: Ritchie Blackmore's absolute need for control. Even though Lord and drummer Ian Paice were founding members, Blackmore saw the band less as a democracy and more as a backing band for his own singular vision. Their friction was mostly professional, but it was a constant, grinding battle over musical direction. Lord had a deep love for classical music, which Blackmore respected, but he was also open to collaboration and the funk and soul influences of other members. Blackmore, not so much. He wanted a hard rock band, full stop. Anything else was met with moodiness and eventually open hostility. This created a perpetually tense atmosphere. John Lord, known for his more gentlemanly and diplomatic nature, often had to play the role of peacekeeper. He and Ian Paice would frequently give in to Blackmore's demands, not because they agreed, but just to keep the whole project from imploding. This pattern of caving to keep the peace fostered a deep, simmering resentment that would linger for years. Lord was a monumental musician, a fact even Blackmore would have to admit. Yet he was consistently forced to bend to the guitarist's will. When Blackmore got tired of the funkier sound Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale brought in, it was a battle he was always going to win, not through discussion, but through sheer force of personality. His exit from the band in 1975 to form Rainbow was the end result of these arguments. He was leaving a band he felt he could no longer control. For John Lord, it must have been a complicated feeling, losing a brilliant, difficult partner, but also being freed from the constant stress of navigating his moods. At number 5, we have another cornerstone of Deep Purple's classic lineup. The man whose bass lines gave Blackmore and Lord a foundation for their fireworks, Roger Glover. Glover joined with Ian Gillan in 1969, kicking off the band's golden age. His inventive, melodic playing was the perfect anchor for the band's wild improvisations. For a while, he and Blackmore weren't just bandmates but good friends. Glover has said that in the early days, Ritchie was his roommate and they'd often party together. But in Ritchie Blackmore's world, friendships were often temporary. The bond between them was shattered by one of the most ruthless lineup changes in rock history. In 1973, when Deep Purple was arguably the biggest band in the world, the internal dynamics were imploding, mostly due to the feud between Blackmore and Ian Gillan. Blackmore had reached his breaking point and was determined to force the singer out, but just getting rid of Gillan wasn't enough. In Blackmore's mind, Gillan and Glover were a package deal since they'd played together in a band before Purple. He figured if Gillan was out, Glover would eventually cause trouble. So with cold precision, Blackmore gave management an ultimatum. Both Gillan and Glover had to go. For Roger Glover, the news was a blindsiding betrayal. He was, as he put it, simply kicked out of the group by Blackmore. In a moment of chilling detachment, Blackmore told him the band needed fresh blood and he shouldn't take it personally. But how could he not? He'd just been fired from the top of the rock and roll mountain, not for any musical mistake, but as collateral damage in Blackmore's war with another guy. The experience was devastating, and Glover later described falling into a deep depression years later. In a bizarre twist that tells you everything you need to know about Blackmore, he asked Glover to produce albums for Rainbow. He even reportedly apologized for the firing, admitting he was wrong. While they managed to work together again, the scar from that betrayal never fully vanished. Glover came to believe that Blackmore thrives on a cycle of creation and destruction, and that he deeply resented Deep Purple's ability to carry on and succeed without him. Coming in at number 4 is the voice of rock, the massively talented bassist and singer who helped redefine Deep Purple's sound in the mid-70s, Glenn Hughes. After Gillan and Glover were pushed out, Purple recruited 2 new members, a young, unknown singer named David Coverdale and the already respected Glenn Hughes, whose soulful voice and funky bass playing would push the band in a whole new direction. From the very start, Hughes's relationship with Blackmore was a head-scratcher. When Hughes first joined, Blackmore flew him to Hamburg for a boys' weekend. They sat on bar stools for 2 days, drinking and talking music. Hughes remembered it as a beautiful experience, feeling like the world's biggest rock guitarist was taking the time to build a real connection, but that one-on-one friendship disappeared the second they were in a group. Hughes noticed that as soon as other men were around, Blackmore's personality would flip. He became distant, isolated, and not personal. He'd travel alone, have his own dressing room, and retreat into his own world. Hughes summed it up with a laugh of disbelief. "I love Ritchie. He's difficult. People are difficult to work with." He called Blackmore, very hard to understand, an oddball and a strange dude, a man whose moods could turn on a dime. The real conflict, though, was about the music. Hughes and David Coverdale brought a heavy dose of funk and soul to the band, which you can hear all over the album's Burn and especially Stormbringer. While this new sound was a hit, Blackmore absolutely hated it. He was a hard rock purist and saw the new elements as a betrayal of the band's identity. He famously sneered at it, calling it shoeshine music, a racially tinged jab at the tastes of Hughes and Coverdale. This creative clash poisoned the well. Blackmore became more and more distant during the making of Stormbringer, contributing very little and emotionally checking out. The tension was off the charts. For Hughes, who was bursting with new ideas, Blackmore's contempt was a constant source of frustration. Years later, Hughes, Coverdale, and John Lord talked about a reunion of their lineup. The idea got serious, but it hit a very predictable wall, getting Ritchie on the phone. Hughes said they all debated who should make the call, but their attempts to reach him through his manager were met with total silence. It was a fitting end to their relationship, a brilliant but difficult man, so locked away in his own world that even his old bandmates couldn't get through. At number 3 is the man who had to fill Ian Gillan's shoes and who, with Glenn Hughes, steered Deep Purple into new waters. The charismatic frontman of Whitesnake, David Coverdale. Plucked from total obscurity, Coverdale was handpicked by Blackmore himself, who loved his masculine, bluesy voice. His first time in a professional recording studio was to make the Burn album talk about a trial by fire. Initially, things seemed to work. Coverdale was the new kid, Blackmore was the boss. But that harmony didn't last. The same creative split that pushed Glenn Hughes away also created a rift with Coverdale. The funk and soul he and Hughes loved was the last thing Blackmore wanted to hear. As they geared up to record Stormbringer, the tension exploded. A key flashpoint was a song Blackmore wanted the band to cover called Black Sheep of the Family. When the rest of the band, especially Coverdale and Hughes, who were writing tons of their own material, said no, Blackmore was furious. That rejection, on top of his disgust for the shoeshine music, sealed his decision to leave. The mood in the studio turned toxic. Coverdale remembered that during the Stormbringer sessions, Blackmore barely spoke to anyone. He'd just come in, record his parts, and leave. The simmering anger finally boiled over in a backstage confrontation in Munich. Blackmore, who was already planning to leave and form Rainbow, asked Coverdale to join him. Coverdale said no, he was committed to Deep Purple. That refusal led to an explosive 20-minute argument. Coverdale stood up to him, saying I was not someone he could control. A lighting tech who saw it happen confirmed he heard furniture being smashed as the band rushed in to break it up. From that point on, their working relationship was over. After Blackmore left, Coverdale fronted a version of Purple that he said was plagued by problems. He eventually quit himself, paving the way for his massive success with Whitesnake. For decades, a feud simmered between the two. But in a surprising twist, they reconnected in 2012 after the death of their friend and bandmate, John Lord. Coverdale reached out to offer his condolences, and the two began emailing, burying a nearly 30-year-old hatchet. Our runner-up is a man who was not just a fellow legend, but Blackmore's handpicked partner for one of rock's greatest bands, the one and only Ronnie James Dio. After storming out of Deep Purple in 1975, Blackmore wanted to build a new band forged entirely in his own image. For his singer, he chose the powerhouse vocalist of the band Elf, which had opened for Purple. That choice gave birth to Rainbow, and for a short, glorious time, the mix of Blackmore's neoclassical guitar and Dio's epic, fantasy-fueled lyrics was pure magic. Their partnership produced three of the most important albums in hard rock: Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, The Epic Rising, and Long Live Rock and Roll. It was a perfect match. Blackmore had finally found a singer whose power could match the scale of his music. Dio, in turn, had a canvas big enough for his lyrical worlds of dragons and wizards. For a moment, it seemed like Blackmore had found his perfect creative partner, but this is Ritchie Blackmore we're talking about, and paradise was always temporary. The very control he left Deep Purple to get became the same force that drove Dio away. Blackmore's vision for Rainbow was absolute. He wasn't looking for a partner. He was looking for a beautiful, powerful instrument to carry out his commands. He had the final say on everything: the music, the lyrics, the image. For a strong-willed artist like Dio, that just wasn't going to work. The conflict came to a head when Blackmore, wanting more commercial success, decided to pivot away from the swords and sorcery themes. He wanted love songs. He wanted pop rock. Hits for American radio. For Dio, this was a betrayal. He famously said, "I don't write love songs," and refused to compromise his art to chase hits. That standoff was the end of their partnership. The tension was also personal. An incident involving a magazine cover reportedly soured things for good. When a solo picture of Blackmore ended up on the cover of Circus magazine, Dio and drummer Cozy Powell angrily confronted him, saying they were being treated like F*** king sidekicks. Blackmore was furious at the accusation. Whether he was fired or quit depends on who you ask. Dio always said he left, but his widow Wendy stated bluntly he was fired for not writing more commercial songs. Either way, the magic was gone. Dio would go on to huge success with Black Sabbath and his own band, but he never worked with Blackmore again. It was a clash of two alpha males, two uncompromising artists on a collision course, a perfect musical marriage doomed by one man's inability to share the throne, and here we are. The #1 spot, the granddaddy of all rock feuds. The most legendary, volatile, and deeply personal rivalry in Ritchie Blackmore's entire career. This is the story of two alpha dogs fighting for the same territory, a clash of personalities. So explosive it tore one of rock's greatest bands apart not once, but twice. This is the epic, decades-long war between Ritchie Blackmore and Ian Gillan, when Gillan joined Deep Purple in 1969. He and Blackmore were, for a time, roommates and partners in crime. They were the twin engines of the classic lineup, the voice, and the guitar that conquered the world. But behind the scenes, their equally massive egos were a recipe for disaster. They were both, as Gillan himself later admitted, assholes. They were two headstrong leaders who both wanted to be in charge, and neither would ever back down. Their relationship crumbled into a series of power plays and open contempt. The non-stop touring only made things worse. By 1973, they couldn't stand to be in the same room, let alone the same band, leading Gillan to quit. When the classic lineup reunited in 1984 for the Perfect Strangers album, it felt like a miracle. But the truce didn't last. The old hatred flared right back up. In 1989, Blackmore actually succeeded in getting Gillan fired from his own band. When the record label forced them to take Gillan back for the 1993 album The Battle Rages On, Blackmore was beyond angry. The tour that followed was a public train wreck. The low point came at the infamous show in Birmingham that was being filmed. Blackmore, reportedly furious about a cameraman's position, refused to come out for the start of the show. When he finally emerged, he stood sullenly at the side of the stage before grabbing a cup of water and dousing the cameraman. The tension was unbelievable. A few shows later, Blackmore quit the band for good in the middle of a tour. Gillan later said that the day Blackmore walked out, the clouds disappeared and the sunshine came out, and that the band had been sinking with Ritchie. For years, the war of words continued. Gillan called Blackmore a weird guy and a pain in the ass. Blackmore called Gillan coarse. While Gillan has said in recent years that the wounds have healed, he's completely ruled out any chance of a reunion, comparing it to getting back together with an ex-wife. You can respect the memories, but you don't want to relive them. It's the perfect final word on the most iconic feud in hard rock history. So that's the list. 6 rock and roll titans, 6 legendary stories of conflict, all spinning around one brilliant and impossibly difficult man. From professional friction to all-out personal warfare, the story of Ritchie Blackmore shows how genius and tyranny can come from the exact same place. His demand for control, his unpredictable nature, and his refusal to compromise both shaped his incredible music and shattered his bands. What do you think? Which of these feuds shocked you the most? Was Blackmore a misunderstood genius or a straight-up tyrant? And are there any other legendary Blackmore clashes we should have included? Let us know what you think down in the comments. And if you love digging into the dramatic, hidden histories of rock and roll, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe for more, and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story. Thanks for watching.